If you're already on your feet, you can remain standing because we're going to return to these words in just a moment. But before we do, we want to offer to God has to be robust and hopeful, and that we're designed to protect white privilege and power have been upheld. And we know that that breaks God's heart. And maybe your heart is a broken thing. And so we acknowledge in this space that a shattered heart, who our country is, and certain stories we don't tell. And specifically, there are certain stories that are Christian. Maybe your heart's holding all of that in tension. Maybe your heart mourns that reality. May our hearts mourn that reality. Who it wasn't safe to see last year, maybe your heart's full of anticipation, and there's room for that too. That's the this morning, as complex, as broken at times.
Whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart. Whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart. Sing, whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart. Whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart. One more time. Sing, whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart. Whoa, whoa, you can have my heart, you can have my heart.
Well, thank you, band. Y'all can have a seat. And welcome that you chose to spend your Sunday with us. Welcome as well to those of you who are joining us online from wherever you may be. I just want to let you know about a couple things we have coming up around here. First of all, a huge thank you to anyone who responded to providing Thanksgiving meals for our neighbors down the street at Bluebonnet Studios. That's a facility that's part of our nonprofit partner, Foundation Communities. We love them. They provide housing to low-income folks who need it. And because of your generosity, we're going to provide 50 Thanksgiving meals to the folks who live right down the road. So thank you. We were blown away, really, by the outpouring of response to that invitation. And if you're still looking for a way to engage, we've got more opportunities coming up. The first is through First Love Ministry. And you'll see a slide for this on the screen if you want to get involved. This is a team who go into strip clubs here in Austin with baked goods and cookies and make sure that the women who work there know that they are seen and loved over the holiday season. So if you'd like to be part of that through baking, you can contact Katie McCormick to arrange that drop-off. If you are afraid you would poison someone with your baking and you'd rather just give, you can use that QR code to contribute to having someone else bake for you. So either way, there's a way to get plugged in to First Love Ministry. We also announced last week, and we are so excited about this, that we're bringing back our children's ministry in the new year. All things pending and trending well, and so we need a few more volunteers to make that happen. If you've been looking for a way to get involved around here, this is a great opportunity to do so. It's 1 hour of your month, and I would be surprised if it doesn't fill you up even as you pour out into our kids. And so you can contact Stephanie at austennewchurch.com, our wonderful children's ministry pastor, to learn more about how to get involved. But we're looking forward to that. And on that note, if you're a kid in the room who's joining us today and you want to go hang out with Miss Stephanie and go to the playground and make crafts and do something probably more fun than what you would think of what's going to happen in here, you can find her there in the back. And parents, you can pick them up on the playground after the service. Fantastic. And finally, we want to thank those of you who've continued in your faithful giving here at ANC. It helps us do all that we do. And if that's a step that you'd like to take, you can participate in generosity through the Giving tab on our website. And now we'd like to invite you all to stand again and find someone you don't know and welcome them this morning. And then we'll be back to hear the sermon. And hello to those of you, again, who are watching online. We're so glad that you're with us. And I'm curious this morning, because you're in your living room, maybe, or in your house somewhere. I'm curious if it's been Christmatized yet, Christmasified yet. Because my house became Christmas yesterday. My father-in-law's in town, and my husband and he went to Lowe's and came home with a 9-foot Santa Claus, inflatable, that's now in our yard. And I never thought I'd be part of the inflatable Santa Club, but I am, and honestly, I'm happy about it. So I'm wondering, are there any other early Christmas decor people out there? Do you have your tree? Are your lights up? Sound off in the comments, maybe even share a picture if that's you, or if it will be by the end of the week. That counts too. And if you're lesser on the holiday spirit, you're welcome here as well. Don't forget, we've got our virtual lobby happening immediately following the service. You can access that through the Out of Towners ANC Facebook group. It's a chance to bump into folks like you might if you were here in person and make some connections with some other out-of-towners. So we hope you'll join us there. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to ask you to find your seat this morning. The gray chairs are the best ones. Just waiting for somebody to go, Well, it's good to be here. Welcome to all of you, those of you who are out of town, those of you who are in town. I can't believe it's Thanksgiving week. How did it become Thanksgiving already? Wait, wasn't it just Easter? This is crazy town. But I'm glad you're here. We have kids trickling home from faraway locales. Lydia's here. Lydia's back for the first time in a while and pulling straight 100s from DePaul University School of Journalism, so I don't know. Well done, baby. Proud of you. Her sister will catch up later as soon as semesters catch up to trimesters, and we'll be eating mushy food on Thursday, right on cue, just like y'all. So here we are. Thank you, Sam, for naming the mixed bag of emotions that is this week, this holiday. You know, I grew up in a church that observed, they thought, three holidays, 3 Christian holidays, they thought. Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. And boy, am I just aware that narrative only works for some folks. That's not everyone's greatest gift. So naming that, I think, is the appropriate thing. That's not to say there's any conclusive ways that we could suggest you might contain your emotions around such complicated matters. It's just simply an effort to say it's a complex day. And it worked out great for some, and it didn't work out great for others. And so I think that's what's mixed about it. And so we have to hold that intention. So thank you, Sam, for naming that. Before we begin our Advent journey, which is now just 1 week away, I'm excited about Advent. That's always one of my favorite times of the year. But before we begin our 4-week anticipation that builds to Christmas, you might think of it as steps down into deeper and deeper awareness and anticipation of the birth of Christ. We have one last conversation to focus on today to lay a good foundation for what's ahead. You know, God's enfleshment is a jarring reality. I don't think it's ever intended to be less. And so we will take our time with that over the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks from now, but 4 weeks building up to Christmas. And of course, we're going to do a Christmas Eve service like we've always done. We've got this funny little thing in our history when we were borrowing space to do church back before we had any space of our own. The only night that we could ever get anyone to let us use their space was on a weird night that wasn't a holiday. So we decided to make Christmas Eve a thing. And so we're going to carry that tradition on. But before we get to all of those things, let's read a text that comes to us from the lectionary from the book of John, and we're switching voices from Mark to John. And you can find it in chapter 18, and of course I read from the New Revised Standard Version because of its attention to gender neutrality and non-specific pronouns when they're not necessary or required. And so picking up in verse 33, it reads this way. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him this question, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replies, verse 35, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews, but as it is, my kingdom is not from here." And Pilate asked him, "So, you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king, but it was for this that I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And it seems like a strange time in the chronological flow of the church year to consider Jesus' official sentencing. Doesn't it seem a little weird to you? A sentencing, of course, that we know will result in the cruelest and the most notorious of public executions. But if you think about placing this in the sequence, I mean, by this time next week, Jesus will just be a hope again. He'll just be an expectation. Remember, when we begin our Advent journey, Jesus isn't yet born. That's the entire point. The chronology of the church can be a funny thing to balance sometimes. Of course it can be. It's not that easy to hold past, present, and future together in our hands and in our hearts. That's actually quite complicated. I should say it's complicated, but we were made for it. We were built for it. You see, the mind by nature is multiple. We are all time travelers, as my friend Christine likes to say. At any rate, I think you'll see the connection to today's little story and where we're headed for Advent in the next few minutes if you're capable or if you're willing to hold space for just a little curiosity this morning. Well, like everything else that I can think of, poetry, history, theology, philosophy, sociology, anthropology, and calculus, this story has several layers of meaning. Actually, I'm not really sure that's true about calculus. I'd have to ask my hard science folks to confirm that. I just thought I'd throw that in. Anyway, today's story has more than one layer of meaning. On the surface, this is the weird little account of the legal proceedings that resulted in Jesus' execution. But it's so much more than that alone. Protecting imperial interests in the tinderbox outpost city of Jerusalem, of course, was Pilate's objective. And that being the case, if Jesus warranted official criminal accusations from the Jewish leaders, which we know to be true, well then at the very least it would be worth investigating from the perspective of Rome, especially if conventional kingship was actually Jesus' ambition. And that's the subject of today's little conversation between Pilate and Jesus. Before we go there, a tiny bit of review. Jesus had upset the Jewish officials enough, presumably by questioning the centrality of the temple, that the Sanhedrin, which was their high council of religious leaders, they had met and they tried to hatch a plan to execute Jesus. And they did just that, only they needed the Roman authorities to do the dirty work, you see. They needed to hire a hitman, essentially. Here was the problem. The Jewish religious authorities had a very tedious balance to maintain with the imagination and the loyalty of the local motion. Jesus had healed, set free, inspired, or otherwise touched enough locals that the Sanhedrin was nervous to strike him down in public. You see, that could backfire, they calculated, and cost them much-needed admiration and trust. Times were hard in the times of Jesus, and support of the locals could not be squandered. You see, the religious authorities in our story were pulling the marionette strings, if you will, of Rome. They needed help to rid the city of this threat to their power. Strange times make for strange bedfellows. As Americans, we know exactly how this works. We've grown up watching religious moguls manipulate the strings of political machinery to do their bidding. What's interesting to me is that the Jewish authorities, as most religious functionaries are, generally, they seem intent on staying pure, even as they hatch murderous plans to have this popular peacenik crushed. It's not the primary focus of today's story, but I can't help but mention this little comedic element that leapt out off the pages for me this week. The Jewish elite were trying to convince Pilate to condemn Jesus to death, but they needed to do it without actually entering the praetorium. Now, your text says headquarters. That's just to help you understand what we're talking about. The praetorium would have been that Roman outpost, that palace where Pilate lived. And they needed help without actually going inside. You see, their misconceptions of God inspired them to think that even coming in close contact with Romans, Gentiles, meant that they were somehow unclean and could not stand before the presence of God in their own temple. And that's a failure on so many levels. I don't even know where to begin. God was not their property, and the law, the basis of Jewish society, was actually given to be a blessing to all families of the earth. And if you don't believe me, go back, all the way back to Genesis 12, and read for yourself how the ancient Hebrews understood that scope and parameter of God's blessing. It was universal before it wasn't. Sure, it was given to Abraham in seed form, as he was the stand-in, the prototype, the patriarch of humanity, but he wasn't the only human on divine radar. That was never the case. He was just a willing human with enough faith to believe God's heart for all people. But that vision had been misplaced with something smaller by the time Jesus comes along. Think about it. Gentiles were always part of the storyline too, my dear friends. There was a court named after them in the temple complex named the Court of the Gentiles. They already had a place on the inside. Jesus doesn't come to update God's awareness of the people of the earth, but to update Jewish awareness of how that had always been true. Romans weren't unclean, and neither were the Samaritans or any other people group the first century insiders loved to despise, at least not in the world of Jesus. Anyway, our story today features the Jewish authorities pulling the puppet strings to get Rome to do what they were unwilling, not unable, but unwilling to do for themselves. You remember, of course, the story of Stephen. He was stoned when questioned by the Sanhedrin. They could have taken life. They were unwilling, given the populous appeal of this wisdom teacher. And so they stand outside, and they shout to Pilate to come outside to hear their case. And for whatever reason he does, under the cover of night, when most dastardly deeds go down. And if you're wondering where I'm getting these contextual clues, they don't appear in the lectionary text that we read. They come from the verses right before the verses that we read. And I'll just pick them up in verse 28. These are the actual technical clues of how this conversation goes down. Verse 28 reads this way: Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas, he of course would have been the high priest of the Sanhedrin, to Pilate's headquarters, the Praetorium. It was early in the morning, and they themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you," which is a little bit like saying, of course he's guilty because we say he's guilty. What a kangaroo court this turns out to be. Pilate says to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." Again, I appeal to your memory, the story of Stephen. Verse 32, this was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death that he was to die. And I actually love how all of this takes place. The lectionary text is about the conversation that happens inside the palace, inside the Praetorium. The preceding verses we just read describe the conversation that happens before, outside with the crowd. I can see every detail of this in my mind's eye, and there's a reason for this. None of you know this because I don't talk about an awful lot of my deep, deep past, but when I was a little boy, say age 6 to 8, I had a role in the Passion Play. It was a theatrical depiction of the life and ministry of Jesus in the Appalachian Mountains just outside of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I cannot even imagine if somebody in this room knows what I'm talking about. Motley Purple seems to know. Thousands of people, it was the 70s, y'all, what can I tell you? Thousands of people came out to see that production on balmy summer nights. And the entire left side of the set, it was a massive set against a hill. The whole left side was the Praetorium. And making it work as both the inside and the outside of Pilate's palace was actually ingenious. It involved the use of a hidden interior hallway and a secret set of stairs no one could see. These were places that I loved to explore when no one was looking. Obviously before the show, not during the show. I was technically not allowed to wander anywhere, but of course I was 6, and so I did. And a funny story, which is 100% unrelated to the points I'm trying to make in today's sermon. One night I forgot to take a potty break before the very, very long crowd scene. Now, we were wearing essentially variations of dresses with rope belts, and you can imagine. And it was the scene where Jesus was teaching in the temple, and it just went on and on and on. And a major portion of that scene involved me standing frozen just off to the side in the shadows. And man, what a puddle did I create when I came to the natural end of my willingness to hold it. But before you feel pity for that little guy, I actually admire him. Remember, we were all young enough once, we were all pristine enough once that we just handled our business like it actually mattered. Whatever our little bodies needed at the time was more important than anything the crowd might have to say about us. I wasn't in it for the crowd. We could all use a little more of those earlier versions of ourselves these days. I know I could, and I don't know when the world beat that child out of you and made you more obsessed with what the crowd might think than what you might need. But I think it would be good work to go back and discover that. I know I'm doing that work myself. But I digress. As I said, it has nothing to do with the points today. What I remember so vividly about the scene was how Jesus, and it was because of my time in the Passion Play, Jesus, Pontius Pilate, and the purity-obsessed mob never occupied the same space at the same time. You see, the midnight mob was left outside the exterior walls of the Praetorium, where the real conversation takes place. The accusers don't come in. You see, accusers rarely do. They usually stand at a distance for their own protection. It's a bizarre kind of comedic tragedy that a mob can be both murderous and simultaneously obsessed with their own purity. Just let that thought sink in. Anyway, John tells us that the mob stayed outside, refusing to go inside so as to avoid ritual defilement. And this is important because this allows Pilate to have the chance to have a private audience with Jesus, which would have been a rare thing. And he takes advantage of that. He asks an essential question that I think we all need an answer to today. By the way, that word formulation, ritual defilement, that ticks me off. That idea should never be attached to a person. Your good standing before a loving God is never at risk because of contact with any of her children. Hatred, violence, exclusivism. Now, those are the things that we ought to be concerned about. Those put us at risk. But can you feel the irony here just for a moment? Who's outside the walls now, Jewish insiders? And I don't mean to pick on the Jewish leaders of our day, of our story today. They aren't uniquely evil. They're just misguided like so many, and they're stuck in that protectionist purity mode. But I do confess this, even though Pilate is probably not the intended protagonist of today's story from the point of John, the perspective of John, I love the nature of the question that he poses. You see, the Jews, when given the chance, mostly asked Jesus, who gives you authority to do all these things? And that feels so defensive and not at all curious to me. No, Pilate, he musters a sophisticated question. He asks, essentially, who do you belong to? Whose kingdom do you belong to? Whose king are you anyway? Who Jesus belongs to feels like a really important question to me. So Pilate goes straight after it. Are you the king of the Jews? Do you belong to them? Now, we know Jesus is consistently unwilling to answer questions. He will answer the questions that he wants to, and he has no problem rejecting the premise of the given question by simply answering a different one. He did it all the time. All wisdom teachers do. And this question, like so many others, elicits a pivot of sorts from Jesus. Are you the king of the Jews? Asks Pilate. Do you belong to them? To which Jesus replies, who's asking? Are you asking for yourself, or are you just naming what's churning in the rumor mill this week in the city of David? You know, a little snark, a little sarcasm, some back and forth, a little more insisting, and Jesus makes it clear that he is in fact no king, at least not of the conventional variety. And his words were, just to remind you, we've read them already once this morning. He answers, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. And Pilate asks him, oh, so you are a king. And it reminds me of the breakup line. So we're through, to which the other person responds, so there's a chance? Like you didn't hear his answer? Like you didn't hear him at all? Oh, so you are a king, says Pilate. Jesus answers, you say that I'm a king. But for this was I born, and for this I came into the world, to test it. What's the this? To testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. For this reason, he's not referring to kingship here. That would be the object of the previous sentence. This is a separate thought. He's referring to truth. Jesus says, you say that I'm a king. I don't. I come for a single purpose, and it's truth, and that belongs to anyone who can embrace it, he makes very, very clear. Now, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and he probably knew some Hebrew as well. Of course he did. Pilate spoke Latin, but he probably knew some Greek as well. And so people have argued for centuries, how did these two communicate? Were they speaking in Greek? Were they speaking in Aramaic? Would it have been Latin? I like the idea that Jesus may have spoken Latin, but we have no evidence of that. We don't know. What we know is that John says that Jesus referred to a kingdom, which was a Greek concept, a kingdom which is not of this world. But the word he uses has nothing to do with conventional power or military might or even ambition. It was different. The idea was influence. Jesus says, I have influence of another world. It's a different realm of authority, not the kind of rule or reign that Pilate would have recognized at all. And tragically, most Christians throughout history have attempted to force a crown on the head of King Jesus. and he never accepted this. You see, Jesus rejects the title King of the Jews. He makes it clear that if he were a king, his subjects would fight back. They would defend. They would have resisted his arrest entirely. No, friends, he has no subjects who bear the expense of his coronation or burden of his physical protection because he is no king, which makes this an ironic sermon on this, of course, Christ the King Sunday, right before Advent. Pilate retorts, "Oh, I see. So you are a king," to which Jesus replies, "There is a single reason I am here. I was born for one purpose, and one purpose only, to bear witness to the truth." And what, pray tell, good friends, is that truth? What is the central claim of God's embodiment in Christ? What was Jesus willing to die for? Oh, just that God is here, inside our world. Who does Jesus belong to? To everyone is the only answer, which leaves Pilate in a bit of a bind. How is that criminal? It wasn't as long as the taxes and tributes were being paid. Alarmingly subversive, very tricky to pin down. Yes, but criminal? Not exactly. Anyway, it's a brilliant question, I think. After all, isn't this the central concern of humanity, one of belonging? Who belongs to whom? Who belongs to what? Whose are we? Now it feels like we're getting somewhere. You know, I think we think that a baby born to our family, I think we think that they belong to us when we bring them home from the hospital. She certainly seems to belong to us. She needs us for everything when we first bring her home. She belongs to us, and we belong to her in a sense, of course, until she grows up and walks that aisle to build a different life with a different soul. No, friends, baby doesn't belong to her parents, at least not as much as sweet baby belongs to herself. Life in time is faithful to make that clear. Perhaps marriage offers true belonging. Certainly one's spouse belongs to them in a mysterious and enduring ways. That's the hope, I would say, but I could argue firsthand that life teaches us all in time that we belong to ourselves in ways we can never belong to our chosen lovers through the sacrament of marriage. National identity, religious affiliation, hometown pride, philosophical persuasion, even a shared allyship over issues of justice that matter offer, of course, a limited sense of belonging, but nothing like the depth of belonging that we have with ourselves if we can find it. You see, the truth is, friends, we belong to ourselves more deeply and more enduringly than we'll ever belong to anything or anyone else. That's the truth. But the mystery is this. We end up belonging to everyone and everything when we figure this out. You see, all life is God's life. It all belongs together. What a peculiar and enlightening little conversation occurs inside the praetorium that night between Jesus and Pilate. What a worthy question and what an expansive answer. While the Jewish religious authorities knew exactly how to pull the strings of power to get what they wanted on a dark night, Jesus seems resistant to such manipulation and control, unwilling to be owned, unwilling to be appropriated by any subgroup. No, Jesus accepts no claim. Love is general, not particular. It's universal, not limited. Jesus, which is, of course, just another way of saying what's true about God, belongs to no one, at least not exclusively. It's true. We were all taught that Jesus belonged to us. He was our personal Savior, after all. I remember those words. I remember youth camp and all of that case that was made. But in time, we've learned to hold him a little bit more loosely, have we not? He squirms out of our grip, mostly when we see his face in the face of those that we were taught to hate to be safe. No, Jesus doesn't belong to me personally or to you. No, friends, love is no marionette. No one controls the animating force of life. Jesus accepts no private claim, no unnecessary limitation. Everyone has access to the truth that love bears witness to, which is that God is here. That God is not somewhere else. God is here. You see, eternity rises from this soil, from all soil, not just our soil. So the answer is to everyone. That's who Jesus belongs to all. You see, dear ones, Jesus isn't the king of the Jews. He isn't the king of Rome. Love isn't the king of the world. No. Love is the king of all worlds. And that's the gospel as clearly as I can tell you this morning. Pray with me. Lord Jesus, collector of broken hearts and wayward souls, remind us today. Remind us today how little of you we control, but how much of you we desire. Move us, inspire us, soften us, prepare us for our Advent journey again as we set out on that road together. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen, friends. I would ask you, if you're able, to join us on your feet, prepare our hearts now for communion. I was somewhere at a wedding or something recently. You know, I've done a lot of COVID weddings. It seems like COVID has either proven to you that this is your person or this is not your person. I've done a lot of weddings, and I've been in conversation with a lot of marriages that are coming to an end. I was somewhere and someone was arguing about how you can't do, they grew up Methodist and they only did communion once a quarter, and the other one, oh, I'm an Episcopalian, we do it every week. We actually are Methodists who do communion every week. And it's really not complicated. The theology is simple. We do it because we've been told to do it. We weren't told to play upright basses and wooden guitars. We weren't told to be part of nonprofits in our city. We weren't told how to build our buildings. We were told simply, when you do this thing, I promise I will be there with you. So as far as I can tell, that's about as primary of an objective and a command as we can get. And so that's what we do here at ANC. If you're new and it feels odd to you, we do it intentionally in a way that does not make you feel singled out if this is something you're not ready for or something you don't understand. What I mean by that is, during the next song, we've got baskets at the bottom of the stained glass that tell the story of the life of Jesus, and you're invited to go and take a little container of juice and cracker. When you're ready, there will be no attention on you. The lights will be dim. But my encouragement to you would be, if your body can accept that profound reminder that God's promise to be with us is as near as the food we eat to sustain our energy in the world, then take that in as deeply as you can. You may not have to understand what's going on. This exchange has been argued about by people far smarter than us, and they've never quite settled it, so it's a mystery. So it goes inside parentheses, it goes inside brackets. It's just something God has promised through the ancients, and so we do it. And so on the night before Jesus was betrayed by his friend and he was exchanged for a statement, a political statement about what systems of faith do to people who are at variance with their rules and regulations, before that all happens in Jerusalem, he gathered with his friends in a borrowed living room, and he broke bread and he lifted it to heaven. And he said, this is actually my body. We are the same. The grain that grew in the earth that produced the bread is just a different expression of the life of God, of which I am as well. And so he breaks the bread and he gave it. And he says, you're going to have to eat this if you're going to understand where we're going next. Then he lifts his cup to heaven. He says, this blood is the sign of a new covenant. It's a new agreement. It's all one, essentially, Jesus says. What a difficult thing to stomach. What a difficult thing to presence. Peter objects to the washing of the feet and the preparing of the meal, and Jesus says, if you can't follow me here, then you can't follow me. And so I would just ask you to prepare your hearts for the bread and the wine again, to be reminded of the nearness of God to us. And maybe I'll invite you to pray with me as well. You know, you should know these words. Maybe you don't. They'll be on the screen. Pray these words, and then during the next song or so, approach the table and partake of those elements when you're ready. Say them with me. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. For that is the kingdom and the power and glory forever.
This is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. This is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. Love, don't let me go, don't let go. 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 This is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. This is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. Oh, love, love, don't let me go, don't let go. Oh, love, don't let me go, don't let go. Love, don't let me go, don't let go. Oh, love, don't let me go, don't let go. 'Cause this is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. Oh, this is where I belong. Held by the arms of love. Love, don't let me. Oh, love, don't let me go, don't let go. 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 Sing, love, don't let me go. Love, don't let me go, don't let go. Oh, love, don't let me go, don't let go. Love, don't let me go, don't let go. Love, don't let me go, don't let go. This is where we belong. This is where we belong. Held by the arms of love. This is where we belong. Held by the arms of love.
God and Father, great and holy, fearing not we come to thee, fearing not though weak and lowly, for your love has set us free. By the blue sky bending over, by the green earth's flowery home, teach us, Lord, the angel chorus. You are love and love alone. That's what you are. You are love and love alone. You are love and love alone. You are love and love alone. You are midst of everything. Just love, Lord.
You are love and love alone. You are love and love.
Even when we don't understand, we know this one thing. We know your love. It's your love. Your love and love alone. Yes, your love. Your love alone.
Beautiful. Thanks, you guys. You can stay on your feet if you're able as I read these words over you as a closing benediction. This comes from our poet, Mark Williams. He writes, "For the last Christians, for those who will not be ruled by their many addictions, and if in the attempt we are misunderstood or misunderstand ourselves for a while, still let us belong only to the early light on a cloudless morning. Let us be drawn like dew from the kingdom of air that surrounds us with its offerings. Let us hold fast to nothing and not be moved. Go in peace." Thanks for being here today. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you next week.